Mr. Rousseau, good afternoon to you. Always a pleasure speaking to you. I know it's a difficult time, of course, for families losing their loved ones, but in the end, it's up to an organisation such as yours to try and give them closure. How is the funeral committee dealing with it at the moment?
Gareth, good afternoon, and thank you to you and your listeners. Yes, it's challenging times. I've just said to some people that everyone forgets, we get the statistics from hospitals and the figures from government, but we don't necessarily understand what is the challenges, the in-between between the actual death and before the burial and the cremation. And that part has been neglected for many, many years, which impacts on society. And I think that's critical to address that. But yes, there is certain challenges that affects not only government, it affects the public, it affects our industry, which has undergone major challenges, especially with this looting and the riots going on, and the challenges of getting death certificates from doctors, getting the deaths registered, because there is certain capacity constraints, and with the overload of mortuaries in the country. There is unfortunately capacity constraints, and the Department of Health and COCTA hasn't addressed that. We've given them some proposals to try and resolve the matters, but it's fallen on deaf ears.
Tell me about those proposals, Mr. Rousseau. Tell me about those proposals.
Well, what we've said to government and to COCTA and to Health and to Home Affairs, that we need to create disaster management facilities, because currently what's happening, because in an unregulated environment, you've got certain emerging and typical fly-by-night storing a deceased at a government mortuary at a hospital without being registered and properly regulated, and that impacts onto the capacity constraints of government. And there is no space available. Some of our members has reported between 50 and 70 funerals per month, and it's a small funeral parlour. So there is definitely an increase versus last year. We've seen that the private crematoriums and cemeteries are filling up. They can't sustain the amount of deaths at this point in time.
And when we start looking at possible solutions, you say you've put forward these proposals. There's obviously some form of communication happening practically on a day-to-day basis for these smaller funeral parlours, and then as we go up on the scale, what would you need at the moment if those who can make a difference are watching right now, Mr. Rousseau? What are you asking of them?
Well, Gareth, what we are asking for COCTA and for the Department of Health in particular, to create these facilities, where deceased people could be stored. We cannot allow a deceased to lie for indefinite period with a government mortuary or with a hospital. The hospitals, in terms of the law, need to have a facility, a cold room facility. They don't have that. So we genuinely plead to government and the private sector out there to let's create this facility so that a deceased person could then be treated dignified and with care. And our members and our accredited networks has already availed themselves. But still then, the capacity is not sufficient to house the deceased people.
You mentioned a little while ago, Mr. Rousseau, about the looting and violence. I'm assuming you're obviously talking about what happened in Gauteng and KZN. Can you unpack that for me? What kind of effect did it have on your community?
Yes, Gareth, unfortunately, we've seen that people have been looting coffins. So the only person or people that would loot a coffin is a funeral parlour, because equipment has been stolen. We've seen that. We've reported that on our Facebook pages. We've reported, we've engaged with the police. We've engaged with SALGA, COCTA and Health Department. The critical factor is that in an unregulated environment, yes, there is laws, but it's not efficiently implemented, and that causes havoc. We're sitting with a disaster in the making.
I appreciate your time, and of course we're going to try and keep track of what is happening with your members and of course your organisation, as it fears, I'm afraid, the number of deaths every day from COVID are going to continue to increase. Johan Rousseau, for the moment, I'm going to say thank you very much for your time in joining us here on Up Front on ENCA this afternoon. That's Johan Rousseau, Funeral Industry Reformed Association. You can hear very worrying, especially for families who've lost their loved ones and unable to give them a dignified send-off.